The time has come to design a new economic system. Existing systems are no longer available to increase the welfare of population. Capitalism has reached the limits of its growth, since there are no more significant unsaturated markets on Earth. Socialism has no internal driving force, as this system equalizing the incomes of different segments of the population deprives the development and motivation of both the poor and the rich. Planned way of economy organization creates an inflexible system unable to respond to the needs of the population quickly, which leads to a shortage of some goods and an overabundance of others. There is a project of such an economic system which is able to continuously increase the welfare of the population, and it's devoid of the shortcomings of the previously used systems. Let us follow the logic of designing a new system together. The country's economy consists of many elements: unemployed and billionaires, hairdressers and nuclear power plants, charities and casinos having complex economic ties and somehow interacting with each other. History has shown that attempts to build economic interactions in a planned way were not leading to success. So in the new system we will leave the market way of organizing the economy, but we will design such conditions in which this market economy will continuously grow at the required speed. To figure out how to start the growth of a market economy, let's divide all economic interactions into demand and supply. Supply tends to be equal to demand in a market system. Moreover, depending on the circumstances, business can satisfy the increased demand both with an increase in the quantity of the product being produced and increase in the price of the product. Now we can formulate the problem more precisely. Let us design an economic system in which the regulator will be able to increase aggregate effective demand at a given speed, and the business, in response to an increase in demand, will seek to increase the quantity of output rather than its price. First, we will understand how to increase the aggregate effective demand and then design the conditions for the aggregate supply formation. Generators of effective demand are economic entities, such as self-employed people, companies of various sizes, and the state. It is worth nothing that the state, in an economic sense, is also a company that provides various services. These entities pay wages to employees, buy goods and services, interact with each other, generating capital and effective demand. It is understood that there is no other effective demand outside of these entities, and any demand is generated by any of them. All the entities aim to earn more, and almost everyone has the opportunity to increase production. Why is effective demand not growing naturally? To understand this, we will decompose all the activities of economic entities into the following components: entities' profit, labor costs, production costs, including taxes and fees. It is important to understand that there is no other effective demand. At any particular moment, any dollar is either the profit of some economic entity, or the cost of employee salaries, or the cost of producing a product or service. The whole effective demand in the country relates to one of these three types of demand and flows from one type to another at different iterations. The reason of that the welfare of the population does not grow by itself, as the possibilities of industry increase, lies in the very structure of the market system. The fact is that the main driving force of the system is the desire to maximize profits. It is this drive that starts and drives the economy forward, improves the quality of goods and increases production efficiency. The problem is that the same capitalist force aims to minimize its costs, some of which are wages, and the average wage is the basis of domestic demand. As a result, different directions of the total will of economic entities blocks the growth of the domestic market and increases satisfaction in society. Forced withdrawal of a significant part of profits in the form of high taxes and distribution of collected funds among the population only redistributes capital, but does not lead to significant economic growth, as it reduces the opportunities and, most importantly, the desire of business to invest in the country's economy, and stimulates a dependent lifestyle among the population. In the current system, the country's economy has only one vector for rapid growth, that is the expansion of markets through product exports. With the growth of exports, the production capacity is loaded, which gives the demand for the means of production, and the demand for labor increases, which leads to an increase in wages, as it was in previous decades. But this resource has been exhausted since there are no more undersaturated markets with effective demand on the planet, and export growth is blocked by fierce competition between countries. As a result, we have a situation in which neither exports nor the domestic market grow significantly despite the huge growth potential of production capacity. However, if it is not possible to increase exports significantly, the domestic market, on the contrary, with competent organization, can grow tenfold, because the level of consumption of the population is an order of magnitude behind the colossally increased possibilities of industry to increase production. It is important to understand that if there is raw material, there is a technical ability to produce more goods, and the population has a desire to get these goods, then the reason that the business does not increase production lies in the wrong organization of capital turnover. It is necessary to transform the population's desire to receive goods into effective demand. Let us consider the domestic market more attentively. Now we know that effective demand given rise to economic entities, and there are only three types of it: profit, wages, and production. We must determine which type of demand suits us as a tool for launching and regulating economic growth. To increase production for the sake of production does not make sense. Profit already tends to the maximum thanks to the will of economic entities. But the cost of labor is a special item of expenditure. Exactly, the salaries form the basis of the domestic market and consumer demand. It is the cost of labor that is the key to an increase in the welfare of the population. Moreover, the growth of wages will increase consumer demand and hence the demand for the means of production and business profits. Now we can formulate our task even more precisely. Let us design such a system in which the regulator will be able to start the growth of wages in the country at the required speed, and the business, in response to increase in consumer demand, will strive to increase the quantity of output rather than its price. However, we remember that chose a market rather than a planned way of distributing aggregate demand and supply, as it is more efficient, and we cannot raise salaries and increase production at our discretion. Therefore, we will have to act taking into account the market laws. In order for a system with an unregulated internal device to expand in the right direction, three conditions must be met. First, the system has the ability to expand in a given direction. Second, the system has the ability to expand only in given direction. Third, the system is forced to expand. To clarify the essence of the method, consider such a process as fuel ignition. It is not possible to calculate the trajectory of motion of each molecule of the expanding gas. But this does not mean that we cannot build an exactly working mechanism using the energy of the fuel. So, for example, an internal combustion engine is designed in such a way that, firstly, the engine configuration gives the piston the opportunity to move. Secondly, the engine configuration does not allow the piston to move along any trajectory other than the given one. And thirdly, the piston is forced to move under the pressure of expanding gas. Therefore, we do not need to calculate the trajectory of each molecule of burning fuel. We consider only the general properties of gas expansion, and this chaotic process, but set in certain conditions, gives us an absolutely predictable result. So in our new economic system, we will create for the market economy such conditions in which it will expand in a given direction with the necessary speed. First, let's deal with the possibility of increasing salaries in the country. Let us consider in an abstract example how the increase in the cost of labor affects the increase in consumer demand and inflation. Let's take a certain company, for example. This company produces product number 1, which costs 100 units. The cost of the product denotes the cost of labor. Suppose that in all companies in the country these costs are 20%, that is, for this product 20 units. If the company increases salaries by 10%, the cost of labor in the price of the product will be 22 units, and the manufacturer will raise the cost of the product by 2 units, that is 2%. We received a growth in consumer demand by 10% and inflation at 2% on this small piece of the market. However, if a single company in the free markets increases the remuneration of labor and consequently increases the value of its product, then this will lead to the non-competitiveness of its product and the disappearance of this company from the market, because consumers will choose a similar product at a lower price. To avoid this, wages should increase for all market participants. If all companies in this segment raise wages by 10% and therefore increase the value of their product by 2%, the balance between competing enterprises will continue, and despite inflation at 2%, consumer demand in this sector will increase by 10%. To understand the way how salary increase will affect the entire process chain, suppose there is a second company producing a more complex product, number 2, for example, costing 500 units already. Let product number 1 for this company is the mean of production. We also single out in the price of product number 2 the cost of labor, which, as we agreed, is 20%, that is 100 units. Then the increase in the value of the means of production by 2 units will increase the cost of the product to 502 units, and therefore will create inflation at 0.4%. And if this entire segment also increases wages by 10%, then the general inflation in this part of the market will be 2.4%, while consumer demand will increase by 10%, and so on up to the end of the technological chain. Similar series of rising inflation will converge around 2.5%. For different industries, the figures will be very different, but the fact remains unchanged that in a competitive environment, if the industry is able to produce more goods, the increase in the cost of labor will increase consumer demand several times more than provoke inflation, because in the cost of product labor is only a certain part. Moreover, that competition will stimulate business to increase productivity and not the price of the goods. Now we know the condition under which wage growth is possible without negative consequences for the economy. The cost of labor must be raised for all market participants. Now we will create a mechanism that makes an increase in the value of labor not only possible, but also necessary. Labor of the worker, in the economic sense, is the same product as any other, and if there is demand for this product and the supply cannot satisfy this demand, then its price will increase. Therefore, in our new economic system, we will increase the cost of labor through a controlled shortage of labor. The only resource, the prices of which the state should regulate in a project way, is hired labor. The rate of increase in salaries will depend on the ability of the industry to increase the supply. At the first stage, it is most reasonable to regulate the shortage of labor resources through a gradual reduction in the number of labor migrants. To do this, it is necessary to significantly change the system of control over illegal labor migration. And when this resource is completely exhausted and there are no significant numbers of labor migrants in the country, a small shortage of labor will be supported by a gradual reduction in the allowable working hours. 8-hour working day and 2 days off a week is the relic of the past, hopelessly outdated. Since then, the production capacity has increased tremendously, and for these capacities such number of working hours per week is clearly excessive, which is a stumbling block on the way to the growth of welfare of the population. Now that we have understood how to start and regulate the growth of effective demand, we will design a system of formation of total supply, so that in response to the increased demand, the business sought to increase the quantity and quality of goods and services produced, and not their value. Thus, we will set the framework in which market will be forced to expand. First, we need our country to have the necessary population to ensure that the level of demand is sufficient for the cost-effective production of goods and services in all existing industries. When calculating, it is necessary to take into account not the current level of demand, but the level of consumption that the population will have when its income will increase many times. Then even those types of industries that at today's level of demand are profitable only when entering global markets can be profitable working only on the domestic market. So, for example, with extremely high by today's standards incomes of the population, each family on average will have 3 cars and buy new cars every 3 or 5 years after the expiration of the guarantee, which significantly changes the strategic planning in the automotive industry, and will allow to work only in the domestic market to several automakers in many large countries. And for the automaker producing, for example, 1 million cars a year, there is no difference to whom to sell their cars, to collect this million worldwide or work only on the domestic market, if the country will have another million solvent buyers. Secondly, the country should have its own raw material base, satisfying almost all the needs of industry for raw materials, taking into account the expected growth of aggregate demand. Both private and state-owned companies can be engaged in the extraction and production of raw materials. The main thing is that the regulator can control the growth of raw materials in accordance with plans for the growth of effective demand. For example, in order to increase production in the automotive industry in accordance with the plans of the regulator to increase the cost of labor by 10%, the regulator must ensure corresponding increase in the receipt of metal processing, so that there is no shortage of raw materials in the country. And what kind of cars will be produced from this raw material will be decided by the consumer buying this or that brand. Thirdly, the country should have developed scientific and technical school that can reproduce any imported product used in the country with a comparable quality, albeit at a higher price. If there is not enough population for the profitable production of goods and services of all existing industries in the country, or not enough raw materials base, or there is no developed science and technology school, it is necessary to make an economic union with other countries that will complement the single economic contour of its population, raw materials and scientific and technical school. To understand the essence of the process of forming a total proposal, we divide it into the following components. Raw materials included in each product. Industrial capacity that turns raw materials into product. Amount of product produced in the contour. Inflation rate balancing the price. The imported product coming into the contour. Let us transform the inflationary component. We will take into account that in the market system, in response to the increase in demand, the business at any opportunity will raise prices, not the number of products, and make the business keep prices at the lowest possible level is only capable of strong competition. In the world, there is a tough competition between manufacturers, which blocks unreasonable price increases. However, we found that to increase the welfare of the population, the cost of labor should increase for all market participants. But we cannot regulate the cost of labor for foreign companies. Therefore, it is necessary to transfer a strong external competition into the contour, and the condition of sufficiency of population will allow us to do this. We will analyze all existing industries. If a contour in any industry does not have domestic enterprises capable of producing a similar imported product of comparable quality, or such enterprises are not sufficient to generate strong domestic competition, then in a project manner, in partnership with the business through the development, purchase or copying of technologies, we will ensure that each industry has several private competing domestic enterprises. Thus, we will transfer a strong external competition inside the contour. When calculating the feasibility of creating production in the contour, you need to consider only the maximum level of consumption within the contour without regard to the competitiveness of the product in the global market. The transfer of external competition into the contour is the most time-consuming point of creating a new economic system and requires the adoption of a large-scale program of development. The implementation of this program in itself will give a qualitative growth of the economy for many years. The most effective algorithm for creating the missing industries in the contour with strong internal competition will be described in the next work. Now, in our system, internal competition between enterprises will not allow unreasonably raising the price in response to increased demand. Let us convert the import component. It should be understood that at the present level of access to information, any country with a developed scientific and technical school is able to reproduce with comparable quality any imported product. The only question is the price of the final product. However, there will always be foreign countries where it is cheaper to produce a particular product, especially since wages in our contour will constantly grow. But the components of each product are production orders for different industries, and any purchase of a product produced inside the contour is an investment into one's own economy, and any purchase of an imported product is an investment in a foreign economy. Therefore, the momentary benefit for the consumer when buying cheap imported goods results in lost profits for local enterprises and ultimately for the same consumer in the medium and long term. Meanwhile, the complete ban on the import leads to the lack of domestic production from world trends. The balanced solution to this problem would be to open the access of the imported product to the contour while simultaneously imposing such high duties on it that the product produced in the contour would be much cheaper than the imported one. Access to the domestic market of imported goods will help to identify unmet demand, and very high prices for this product will create a strong motivation for business to create production of this product within the contour. At the initial stage, the quality of some goods produced within the contour may be worse than imported ones, but high internal competition and increasing effective demand quickly equalize the difference in quality, as this many times was in history. It should be openly explained to the public that a very expensive imported product stimulates business to produce similar products at a lower price inside the contour, which makes it possible to create new high-paying jobs and allows the regulator to constantly increase the cost of labor. We will establish high trade barriers in our economic system. Thus, we have created conditions in which the system of formation of aggregate supply has to expand in the direction we need. Now, when we increase effective demand, strong competition will not allow raising prices for goods and services, and high trade barriers will not allow compensating for the growth in demand with a cheap imported product. Consequently, under the increased effective demand, the business will produce more goods and services. The last element of our new system will be the mechanism for limiting the withdrawal of large capital. To clarify the need for such a measure, as an example, consider the economic contour consisting of only 10 people. One main producer of the necessary product and 9 consumers of this product who earn by doing something necessary for the main manufacturer. The turnover of capital in such a contour is as follows. Consumers buy goods from the main producer, and the main producer spends the profits by buying something from the consumers. Such system is capable of growing. To do this, the main producer needs to produce more and consume more. Then consumers can buy more goods from the main producer, making it even richer. But if the manufacturer part of the profits will be taken out of the contour, then he will not buy goods from someone from consumers, which means these consumers will not have money to buy goods from the main manufacturer. Thus, taking the capital out of the contour, the manufacturer has reduced both the incomes of the consumer and their revenues. Such a system is not capable of growth due to the expansion of the domestic market, because there is no sense for the main producer to produce more goods, because consumers will not have money to buy them. In reality, the number of economic ties is much larger, so an economic entity that has withdrawn capital by contour does not see a causal relationship between capital outflow and falling demand for its own goods domestically. But on a state scale, capital outflow is either blocking economic growth or forcing the country to seek foreign capital. In order for the economy to be able to reproduce, the large capital received in the contour must remain in the contour. Then it will be possible to increase the welfare of the population, and the business will be able to increase revenues due to the growing domestic market. Meanwhile, it does not matter who will spend the profits inside the contour and what kind of product will be bought. Imagine that a businessman received a large profit from the sale of goods of his company and spent a fortune inside a contour on a seemingly useless thing from an economic point of view, for example, a rare record of a favorite artist. But the person who received a lot of money for the plate will spend it for buying, for example, house or car, which will provide orders for the company that will pay salaries to the employees who will buy goods from a businessman who bought the record. So it does not matter on what the money were spent on inside the contour. They will be redistributed in one way or another among the entire population. But if the same businessman brought the money out of the contour, for example, would have bought a yacht abroad, then the contour would be depleted by exactly this amount and could not be reproduced at the same level without the inflow of foreign capital. Thus, any restrictions of consumption within the contour, such as a progressive taxation scale or a luxury tax, should be removed. The spending of rich people on goods and services produced inside the contour should only be welcomed. But the complete liberalization of the movement of capital within the contour must be combined with a restriction on the withdrawal of capital. To limit the withdrawal of large capital is reasonable through the introduction of soft currency regulation. The population is free to buy currency, but only when traveling abroad. The permitted purchase volume must be large enough so that people do not experience discomfort when traveling abroad. A business will be able to buy currency in any volume, but only for delivery to the contour of any imported goods. It is necessary to explain population that the soft currency regulation is intended to limit the withdrawal of large capital and practically will not affect 99% of the population. People will be able to travel freely as before, and the established limits on the purchase of currency will repeatedly exceed the population's spending on tourism. It is necessary to bring to business that withdrawing capital outside the contour indirectly reduces business revenue, and soft currency regulation will allow the domestic market to grow continuously, which will constantly increase the business profits that it can spend in the contour for anything. Of course, it will be necessary to establish a transitional period so that foreign investors who have invested capital in the country can sell their enterprises in the market if they are not satisfied with the regime for restricting the withdrawal of capital. Now the profits will be spent on consumption or on investments within the contour, fixing the economy at a new level. The system is ready to launch welfare growth. Let's check how our system works. Let's start economic growth. We will begin to reduce labor migration in the contour smoothly. This reduction will create a small shortage in the labor market. which will lead to the optimization of all economic processes, but only to a certain level. Entities will raise wages inevitably, compensating for the resulting deficit. Raising the salaries will cause additional demand for goods and services. Strong internal competition and sufficient raw material base will not allow compensate for increased demand by higher prices, and high trade barriers will not allow to meet increased demand by increasing imports. Therefore, in our reformed contour, the increase in consumer demand is offset by an increase in the quantity of goods and services produced. That will increase the demand for the means of production in its turn, which is again compensated by an increase in the number of relevant goods and services. Satisfied increased consumer demand will increase entities' profits, and the restriction on large capital withdrawal will direct the resulting profits to consumption or investment within the contour, fixing the contour's economy at a new level. Increasing the number of goods produced will require increase in production capacity and the labor resource. This will again create a small deficit in the labor market, which will repeatedly launch the cycle of economic growth until the shortage of labor is compensated by the modernization of production capacities, because economic entities will seek to replace the expensive human labor with the work of machines. When the growth of wages begins to fade, the regulator will reduce labor migration, launching a new cycle of economic growth. After many years, when the modernized economy of the contour stabilizes at some level and labor migration in the contour disappears as a phenomenon, we will again start the process of economic growth by reducing the working hours rate. Through a change in labor laws, we will begin to reduce the rate of permissible working hours smoothly. This reduction will create a small deficit in the labor market again and increase the cost of labor, which will trigger economic growth in the contour again. One should understand that the designed economic system will grow at the required speed only if all the conditions of the project are implemented in the contour. Just as a car will not travel without spark plugs or a gasoline pump, so designed economic contour will not work properly without any of the elements of the system. Thus, without a sufficient population or in the absence of a developed scientific and technical school, it will not be possible to create strong internal competition in each industry, which means that the growth of the demand will provoke the manufacturer to increase the price of goods, not the quantity of goods. Without its own resource base, the contour will have to import a significant amount of raw materials, which means it will be necessary to look for opportunities to export their goods, which will limit the ability of the regulator to increase the costs of companies in the form of higher labor costs. And in the absence of wage growth, the domestic market is not able to grow. Without high trade barriers, demand will be met by a cheap imported product, which will destroy domestic production and reduce the number of jobs in the contour, which will be an obstacle to the growth of wages. If we do not protect the contour from illegal labor migration, we will not be able to regulate the cost of labor, creating a controlled shortage of labor, because increasing demand for labor will not be offset by wage growth, but by the influx of labor migrants, which will block the growth of the domestic market. The absence of restrictions on the withdrawal of large capital will not allow the system to be reproduced at a higher level, or will require the search for foreign capital, which will make the contour dependent on external conditions. Elements of the system put in together form a perfect mechanism, which has a precisely predictable response to the actions of the regulator and a perfectly balanced system of capital allocation between the interests of business and the public. Therefore, we call the designated contour perfect. Bringing the contour to a perfect appearance will probably reduce the growth potential of product exports, but is guaranteed to lead to an increase by an order of magnitude in the domestic market, which is tens of times more than possible losses in exports. Applying accurate design methods to the economy, we created a system similar in controllability to technical devices. Just as a device of an internal combustion engine does not allow the piston to move in any direction other than the given, the device of a perfect contour in response to an increase in demand forces the system to expand domestic production. As in the engine, we feed the fuel and give a spark, so in the perfect contour we control the supply of raw materials and start the growth of the economy, increasing the cost of labor. Just as the force that arises during gas expansion is unchanged, so is the constant desire to maximize the profit that drives the entire system forward. And as in the engine, we don't care about the trajectory of each gas molecule. So in the perfect contour, what exactly will the increased demand be directed to, and which companies will satisfy, define the market. As a result, we have a system with a constant increase in the well-being of the population, which does not depend on the situation on foreign markets, politics or technological cycles. The construction of the perfect contour makes the relationship between the welfare of the population and the profit of the business as strict as the relationship between the various parameters of the geometric shape. Unlike the existing economic system, whose growth largely depends on external factors and is not amenable to effective regulation, in a perfect economic contour we can change a parameter convenient for us, and the whole system will increase, and the structure of interactions within the economy will be determined by the market. Ultra-high, by today's standards, wages and the presence of a large amount of free time will radically change the way of life of the population and will allow the state to remove a significant part of the social burden. Instead of living on benefits or hatch working time, simulating a stormy activity for a small salary will come a short but intense work for a very high pay. The perfect economic contour is a synthesis of the opposing systems of several levels at once. Synthesis of market and planned economy models. The planned increase in solvent demand and the supply of raw materials to the contour are combined with a market-based way of meeting demand. The regulator in a planned way increases the incomes, and the market determines how exactly they will be spent. Thus, the risks inherent in the market economy are being eliminated, and the product deficit accompanying the planned way of organizing the economy is eliminated as well. Synthesis of capitalism and socialism. The capitalist aspiration of economic entities to maximize profits and minimize costs is balanced by the social orientation of the vector of economic raise. In the perfect contour, there is no need for high taxes for the rich and their subsequent distribution among the rest of the population, as the entities are forced to raise wages anyway, what removes much of the social burden from the state. In a perfect contour, the capitalists increase their income by increasing the welfare of the population. Synthesis of open economy and autarky. Free access to the contour of imported goods, devoid of competitive price advantages by trade barriers, allows revealing unmet demand, but it does not allow replacing goods made inside of the contour with imported ones. Free travel beyond the contour boundaries for the population makes it possible to synchronize the global perspective directions of the society development with the directions of development of society within the contour. Also, the ban on the export of significant amounts of capital stimulates the population and economic entities to invest to the economy of the perfect contour, reproducing it at a higher level. It should be understood that at the current level of civilization development, there is no other constructive way to increase the well-being of the population, except for the increase in the cost of labor. But as well as competition between companies, competition between countries blocks the growth of production costs, some of which are wages to employees. For the cost of labor to increase for all global market participants at the same time, a single global regulator is needed. But today, due to political differences, the creation of such a regulator for the entire planet is not possible. Therefore, the world will be divided into several macro regions, in which countries will form a perfect economic contour. There is the possibility of creating perfect economic contours on the basis of currency zones at the moment: dollars, euro, yuan, rubles, rupees. In order to enter a new stage of development of society, countries should be included in the designated currency zones, forming the appropriate perfect contours, or form new currency zones, uniting in complex structures to complement the overall contour of the missing elements. The video was made as a summary of the work Perfect Economic Contour. To understand in detail the essence of economic interactions, you can get acquainted with the work itself. If you think it's time to do something with the economy, click like button. Write in the comments what you think about this topic, share with friends and subscribe, so as not to miss the next video. In that way, you are able to bring the issue of evolution of the economic system to the forefront of public consciousness.